Oh, okay.
All good.
Yeah, all good. Suddenly I
Yeah,
can go out
I'm
and
convinced
play.
that she cries for social, like,
Yeah.
she's learned.
Yeah.
It's what we do.
Yeah.
When she was very little, I was like, there's things happening to you that would really hurt others.
So we're about to start. We had a question, and I think the answer is probably yes. Is there an audiobook version of this?
There is an audiobook version. Yeah.
Yeah, that means on our website you can get it.
Yeah.
So instead of buying it from a certain big corporation, the American Bookstore Association has Libro FM. It's on our website. The same quality audiobook, and you can buy it and support independent bookstores. So when you go on our website to search for like the print book, it'll have an option to search for the audiobook as well, and an ebook. Well, we're very happy to have everybody here tonight. It's our first event behind the bookstore again. Please excuse my voice. I've had a week of the pollen and allergies, and I think I'm on the tail end of it, but I'm not sounding like I usually do. But we're really excited to have you here. We're very excited to have Michelle Young here. She's kind of inaugurating kind of our summer out here where we're waiting. Can't quite use public park yet, but we're on our condo association property, which sometimes we're back here when it rains. Suddenly we're underneath there. We make a mad dash for it. So still nice. We got Michelle's got the beautiful beach, ocean in the background, and we're excited about that. We do. I already got an email, 2 emails earlier today. Yes, I will be bringing signed copies of the book to Boston as well through Boston Store, so we'll have them. So right now, until they run out, if you buy it on our website and want a signed copy, you'll be getting it. So I'll just be designating those. Very quickly, let you know the upcoming events. We've got them all summer here on our website. And you can take a look at those. The very next one that will be here at our Provincetown bookstore is Robert Rausch, The Summer Between, and that's on the 21st of June. We do have other events that we're doing in partnership with 20 Summers and some others, and you'll see that on our website as well, but they'll be like in different locations. Our next event in Boston is this Saturday the 14th at 12 p.m. with HBO star Jeff Filler, co-star of Somebody Somewhere. He has a new book coming out on Tuesday called An Actress of a Certain Age, and so that'll be there. And take a look at all that. We did get some questions about years of videos on our Facebook page, and where are they? Facebook has decided to change their policy for businesses and individuals, and videos will not be on there longer than 30 days until they get deleted. So we've been trying, and they've extended their deadline again, but it's ending soon. We've been trying to download as many as possible and get them onto our YouTube channel. So eventually, soon, we will be live streaming from our YouTube channel directly and no longer with Facebook. But at the moment, that's why they're not there. Yeah, but anyway, yeah, very excited. This book, I got an early ARC, advanced review copy. And we were so excited, and we didn't have a connection then, but and then miracle, we were able to get this event set up, and it's kind of lovely, kind of in that time before it gets insane in Provincetown, where it's mellow and you can actually walk around and relax. And unfortunately, like it's in the evening, it's now a little cooler, so we're kind of like out here. But this book has been one of the biggest talking books in our store here and in Boston. People are so excited about this book. The press has been great. I'm going to thank Provincetown Magazine for excerpting the wonderful excerpt you had in there. And I think your website has the rest of your book tour on there? Or
Yes, yeah, MichelleYoungWriter.com.
Okay, so if people are looking for where she's going to be after that, take a look at that as well. So the Art Spy, I'm not going to say too much. Unbelievable, untold tale of World War II resistance hero. I mean, in the day and age that we're in right now, we need to look at heroes, right? And she is definitely a hero. And I think, when you get this book, I'd say probably don't read it when you're in bed. only because you can't stop reading it. You put it down, so it's that good. So we're very excited to have her here. And again, that sound you hear is really the surf, the ocean. Ignore that, but no. But we truly are very excited to have Michelle Young here. I do want to say we've got a very good. She's got an incredibly impressive biography. It's on our website, the whole thing. But I did want to mention that she is an award-winning journalist and author. This has been the weekend of journalists that we've had. You know, Geraldine Brooks last night, war correspondence before she turned to fiction. We've had a number of journalists the past couple of weeks. She's a professor of architecture at Columbia University's Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation. She got her master's degree there, and she's a graduate of Harvard College. Yeah, wonderful. In the history of art and architecture. She's the founder of the publication Untapped New York, which I want to know more about that. So we get to,
Okay.
And she divides her time between New York City, Paris, and the Berkshires, which she did tell us earlier.
Yeah.
It's going to be your full-time home at some point. Is
Yeah.
Paris out then?
Yeah, we for now.
Anyway. But without further ado, we're so thrilled to have you, Michelle. Thank you for
Thank
coming
you.
to Provincetown and
Yeah.
East 10 Books.
Thank you for having me. Well, I thought I would start out with a reading and then talk about Rose Valland and some of the themes and events in her life, and then questions, but also feel free to interrupt me at any time with questions, because I actually prefer when the events are not just me talking on, but conversation-wise. So I'm going to open with the very beginning of the book. And this is in the days before the liberation of Paris. Paris, August 19, 1944. A torrential storm was pummeling Paris, turning the skies forebodingly dark over a city in the midst of a tense mandatory blackout. The clamor of thunder and the sounds of war rose to a crescendo as the battle for Paris began. After 4 brutal years of German occupation, the City of Light was allegedly going to be liberated. Cannons boomed and shells whistled above the Seine, just meters away from the Jeu de Paume Museum. Inside that 19th century building, 45-year-old French art historian Rose Valland peered out from a slightly open window. The French resistance had ordered a citywide uprising, and 4,000 plainclothes police officers wearing tricolor armbands, the red, white, and blue of the French flag, invaded the police headquarters facing the Cathedral of Notre Dame and took over Paris's city hall, flushing out the Nazi occupiers. The Germans countered with bombs and blasts from their own armored tanks, trying to take the buildings back. Gunfire from street skirmishes rang out throughout the city. Bullets shattered windows and pierced buildings. German soldiers on foot attacked the street barricades built by Parisians out of burned-out cars, furniture, sandbags, barrels, cobblestones, pianos, and even urinals. From the Jeu de Paume, Rose could see dark smoke rising from the Grand Palais, the glorious palace of iron, steel, and glass on the Champs-Élysées that was used throughout the occupation for propaganda exhibitions. The Germans had sent a remote-controlled tank barreling into the building to kill the French resistance fighters who had barricaded themselves inside. At just under 5.5 feet tall, Rose was dwarfed by the scale of the Jeu de Paume's colossal arched windows, but there was nothing timid about her. 4 years earlier, the Nazis had seized the museum to make it a headquarters for its art-looting force, the Einsatzstab-Reichsleiter Rosenberg, to process the Jewish-owned art they had begun to plunder en masse in France. Her boss, Jacques Joujard, the director of the Musées Nationaux, the French National Museums, immediately ordered her to, quote, remain at all costs at the Jeu de Paume Museum, end quote, and covertly spy on the Germans. Iron-willed Rose was determined to see her orders through, but she did not know she would risk her life for the next 4 years to achieve her mission. Rose had a reputation for being overly serious and too blunt for her own good, but her unflappability had proven useful in the war. She had learned to play the role of a nobody to the Nazis, not important enough to notice, not congenial enough to be flirted with, and too grave to be easily friends with. Unlike the other women who worked in the French museums, she didn't bother much with her looks. Her most defining accessory was her round spectacles, which gave her an air of erudition. Although it was in vogue to wear one's tresses in soft waves just above the shoulder, Rose simply brushed her brunette locks to the side and pulled them back in a neat bun. She left her eyebrows natural and mildly unkempt, unlike those popularized by cinema stars like Arletty and Danielle Derieux, who wore them razor thin and drawn in darkly with pencil. Sartorially, Rose did her best to fit in. Though she would have much preferred to wear pants, she donned feminine ankle-length dresses and blended in with the rest of the women in Paris, modest, traditional, and discreet. Still, the Germans had accused Rose of everything in their arsenal: sabotage, theft, and signaling to the enemy. They subjected her to invasive interrogations and searches, and even expelled her from the museum on several occasions. But she talked her way back in every time, explaining calmly that she was just a lowly employee of the French National Museums, who oversaw the building's maintenance and the remaining art collection. In reality, she was one of the most well-educated art historians in France, and nearly every one of the German accusations had been true. So that's part of the first epilogue, you could say, of the book. But I wanted to introduce a little bit about Rose herself and where she comes from. So she comes from a town called Saint-Étienne-de-Saint-Joire. This is a town, small countryside village, 40 miles southeast of Lyon. And at the time she's born, Lyon is the third largest city in France. Her father is a blacksmith. Her mother is a stay-at-home mother. And so Rose has a very, very unlikely rise as a woman in the working class to really the pinnacle of art and culture and art historical studies in France. She gets these opportunities because her mother is extremely diligent at applying for scholarships. So as an early teen, she gets to go to boarding school, not too far from home, and then the Teachers College in Grenoble for high school. And finally, in college, what would be equivalent to our college, she goes to the École des Beaux-Arts in Lyon, which is training future artists. So she's learning fine arts, painting, drawing, etc. She does so well there. She wins regional awards, school awards, national awards, and she passes the exam to enter the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. So this is the best art school in France. It's where all the major artists have studied, I think apart from Picasso, who didn't get in, and some other modern artists. But all the famous French history painters have gone there. And again, it's training future artists. And if you don't make it as an artist, perhaps art teachers. I think she recognizes at this time that she's probably not going to become a famous artist. Actually, most of them are men. And in addition to that, maybe she doesn't think she has the full skills to make it to that level. And so she then applies to the École du Louvre, that's part of the Louvre museum, and there they're training future curators and art historians. So here is where she meets her first setback, first nemesis. His name is Henri Verne. He's the head of the Louvre, head of the École du Louvre, head of all the French museums. And he doesn't like the fact that she's modern. I think he doesn't like the fact that she also doesn't come from the elite classes in France. She's really an upstart who has made her way. And in addition, her close mentor from the École du Louvre is his rival. And that mentor is now head of the Sorbonne. And so for all these reasons, and he's not a feminist by any means, he gives her a really bad grade on her thesis, and this prevents her really from getting most jobs. Definitely nothing at the Louvre where he's in charge, but other places, for example, the Beaux-Arts Ministry, the head would write a letter to Henri Verne saying, Rose Valland has applied for this job, do you recommend her, what do you think? And he would spend quite some time explaining why she should not have the job in great detail. And so by the time she graduates from the École du Louvre, she can't find a job, And a year later, she takes an unpaid secretarial job at a museum called the Jeu de Paume. And this is a modern art museum. You have a question?
Yeah, what was her thesis on?
Oh, yes. So actually, one of his criticisms was that this is not art history, he said. And the thesis was the study of movement in Italian art from the Renaissance to her present day. So nothing controversial, especially from our perspective. And one of the things, I identified with a lot of things about Rose, and this one really struck me because actually when I was at Harvard, I wanted to write my thesis about fashion as represented from Greek vase painting to the modern day, and was told this is not art history. You should transfer to sociology. And I said, I've got 4 months left. I'm not starting a whole degree again to write this thesis. But then lo and behold, about 3 years later, the Met did an exhibition about fashion design in art. So, you know, and then I met a professor in art history, she's retired, at Williams, who actually had the same experience, I believe, at Yale. So these kind of things, history repeats itself. And again, there was nothing controversial about her history. But at that time, it was believed that you didn't study movement in art because art was a static image. And so that's kind of why he could say this is not art history. But obviously, we were already in a time where we already had paintings by Marcel Duchamp, Nude Descending a Staircase, which is showing movement. So we were already in a time that it was understandable that a student might want to look into this. So she takes this job, unpaid, as a secretary in the Jeu de Paume. The Jeu de Paume is a modern art museum focused on the international schools of modern art. So they do exhibitions by country. So the modern art of Spain, the modern art of Latvia. They did a exhibition with MoMA, 3 centuries of American art, that included photography, film, and painting and sculpture and such. And Rose actually worked directly with Alfred Barr, the director of MoMA, on this exhibition. And when you start as a secretary in the French civil service, there's almost no way you're going to be able to switch that into a track to become a curator. So she campaigns very hard. We see in the archives letters of recommendation from leading art historians, also a senator from France. A lot of people weigh in saying we should give Rose this job. And every time it's refused to let her move to the curatorial side. So she spends 4 years as an unpaid secretary, and then is finally allowed to move to become an unpaid curator, assistant curator, right, or such. And so this is the position she's in when World War II breaks out. And the museums had been focused on how to protect the art in their collections since 1931 or 32, around the time that the Nazis become the dominant political party in Germany. They wanted to avoid at all costs what happened in World War I, in which they only started moving art out of Paris when the Germans invaded France. And so stuff like the Mona Lisa and the Victory of Samothrace was last minute just being thrown into trucks and moved elsewhere. And so they spent many years planning for it, making lists, ordering supplies. And so Rose is a big part of that effort, especially for her museum. Her boss there, a man named André Desorrois, is a World War I flying ace. And befitting of his social status, he spends his time hobnobbing, traveling around the world, acquiring new art, planning new exhibitions. So Rose basically runs this museum and manages the staff there, the guards, the custodians, and manages all the art that's coming in and curates it. And so the museums get a chance to test out their plans in 1938 during the Sudetenland crisis that leads to the Munich Agreement. And then in 1939, August, September, as war is about to break out, they do a huge movement of the collections from all over France and in Paris to the Loire Valley and hide them in castles there. And one thing I should mention, which is why I was very happy to come here during Pride Month, is that Rose has actually been in a relationship with another woman since likely the late 1920s, early 1930s. This woman's name is Joyce here. She is British, but half German. And she comes initially to Paris from Germany after being born in England and spending her early years there. She comes to finishing school in France, and it turns out that Rose Valland is her French teacher there. And this is, I spent many months digging into Joyce because she's not a public figure, so we don't know anything. There's not much known about her, and actually the prevailing thought was that they had met in Germany after the war. And so actually I turned in a version of this manuscript, the first version, with no Joyce except at the end. And then I got to speak to Joyce's family, who said, well, we believe they lived together during the war. Well, that would really change this book, because this book is about Rose's wartime years. So I then spent several months tracking Joyce down using kind of mundane documents, because if someone existed, they have things, not in her case a driver's license, but ID cards, maybe health records, employment documents. So that's how I started to put together the Rose and Joyce's life, and when they began to intersect, when their addresses started to line up, and then piecing together when they may have met. And really bringing Joyce into the narrative allowed me to humanize Rose, who's often thought of as someone that was unemotional, very academic, just someone who took notes and who didn't reveal too much about herself. But many things happened, including Joyce getting arrested by the Germans just for being British, along with 5,000 other British people in France. And this all happens around the same time that the Nazis take over her museum. So that happens in November 1940. And the Nazis had been looting, well, all the countries. Once they entered, they set up government and they start looting. But they were very particularly interested in the art in France for I think reasons we understand. And they came in with reports that had been done by secret emissaries about where all the art they felt rightfully belonged to them were located. So that was art that Napoleon plundered, art that they had to give up in the Treaty of Versailles, which they believed to be extremely unfair. And then they had a list of the 15 major art galleries, almost all of them which were owned by Jewish art dealers. And so they sent commando units to liquidate all of that. And so within the first week of July, all those art galleries had been emptied. And all of that originally went to the German embassy in Paris, but all the Nazi henchmen, you might say, were fighting about who would control the looting operation. And so originally, the ambassador had took it upon himself, once Hitler issued his decree, well, I'm going to do it, and Ribbentrop will support me because it's part of basically the German State Department. But then other players wanted to come in, Alfred Rosenberg, Hermann Göring, and they all fought about it until Rosenberg and Göring essentially won. And so they requested for the art to be moved from the embassy to the Louvre, and then the Louvre ran out of space in the rooms given to them on the ground floor because there was too much art that was stolen. And so they requested a building, they requested somewhere else that would be larger, that they could move the art and serve as a kind of clearinghouse. Art would come in, they would document, and then it would get moved somewhere else. And so, but anything the Germans did in France, they had to get permission for it, because the treaty, the armistice was only considered temporary. They figured the Germans, the British would surrender soon, and then a peace treaty would happen, and then all of this would be dealt with. And so in the interim, they have to deal with Vichy on various things. So if they want a museum or building in Paris, they have to get permission for it. So they have to ask the new head of the French museums, Jacques Jaujat, this very Humphrey Bogart looking man, very suave, Humphrey Bogart, maybe mixed with Cary Grant. And he offers up the Jeu de Paume Museum, very likely because he knows there's someone inside who can keep tabs on what's going on. And because Rose has been with Joyce for so many years, she knows some German. And so he then tells Rose to stay at all costs in this museum. So she spends 4 years in this museum, at first trying to figure out who are these players, who are the people coming into the museum. You can see in her notes, she's listening, so she's writing names phonetically, putting question marks. And then over time, of course, she figures out who they are. And she documents where the art's coming from, what they are, and then where they're going, what are the shipping manifests, the crate numbers, etc. And then she does this in hopes that well, it's almost like she believes that the Germans will eventually lose, and that this information can be used to locate it, but then also in a future war tribunal as evidence that this looting occurred. So, I don't know, should I do another reading, or you want to
I think
talk
so.
more? Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
So, let's see. I think... So, a lot of things obviously happen related to art in the war and at this museum. And one of the things that Rose was questioned about when she published her memoir in 1961 was an event surrounding the burning of 500 modern paintings in the courtyard of the Jeu de Paume. So I'm going to read to you this passage about it and then tell you more about that. July 22nd to 23rd, 1943, the Jeu de Paume. Rose's worst fear was coming to fruition. The Germans had decided the fate of the remaining modern paintings from the Salle des Martyrs. That room is the room in the museum where they stuffed all the modern art they didn't know what to do with, because the Germans didn't value it because Hitler didn't like it. So they just kind of pushed them into a room. The last classification, so Rose had seen them start to make 3 classifications, A, T, V, and she was trying to figure out what those letters meant. The last classification, V, was for vernichten, destroy. For several days, the entire staff had diligently unpacked and sorted hundreds of modern paintings in the ERR rooms at the Louvre. On July 22nd, Gaston Petit, the head of security, saw the Germans slash a painting formerly owned by the Jewish heiress Madame Schwab de Héricourt. Eugene Fenitzer, a Jeu de Paume guard, watched as the Germans knifed and kicked the canvases with unbridled satisfaction. Pictorial arts director Robert Schultz sliced the paintings from top to bottom, and then Walter Borchers came over to stab them repeatedly. Any works by a Jewish artist or that depicted anything deemed Jewish, particularly family portraits, were desecrated. They slashed the women's faces and chests. This is a quote. In them was a poison to be destroyed, Rose described, of the rabid view the Germans took toward the chosen paintings. The jarring sounds of canvas punctures and long knife tears echoed through the marble-floored rooms, which had historically been used to showcase art, not to attack it. Each painting held thousands of years of collective evolution in the art of representation, technique, and subject matter. Thousands of years of contemplation and how the real three-dimensional world and the complexity of human nature could be embodied on a two-dimensional canvas. Art is transcendent, a visual medium that stirs emotion and helps people understand their place in a world that can never be fully comprehended. Even the earliest men and women made rudimentary art within the environment around them. This wanton destruction in the ERR rooms in the Louvre served to erase a form of expression through which humans differentiated themselves from animals. And yet here were men of a supposedly superior race, acting in the most inhuman, destructive way. Hundreds of paintings were destroyed at the Louvre and torn from their frames. As Rose described, the choice was sumptuous. Almost all the paintings by Dali and Masson were lacerated into obscurity. Several family collections, including that of artist Eugène Spiro, were completely destroyed. Some Picassos, including a painting of a harlequin and a still life with musical instruments, were left in tatters. In more halcyon days, many of these artists were celebrated on the walls of the Jeu de Paume. When the men were finished, they piled the painting scraps onto military trucks and drove everything to the Jeu de Paume. From there, Rose watched them unload the remnants of the paintings and the frames into the walled garden. More horror unfolded the next day. In the morning, the Germans designated Paul Blondel, a French guard at the Jeu de Paume, to set the scraps and frames ablaze. An armed German sentry supervised the destruction, preventing people from approaching the scene, while his underlings tended the pyramidal funeral pyre. Rose, who saw everything from the large ground floor windows and glass doors of the museum, watched in abject horror. Over and over, she would see a flash of a painting and then watch it melt away, devoured by the inferno. The frames and canvases crackled and snapped under the flames. A column of smoke billowed into the sky. The Germans looked like witless disciples participating in a sacrificial ritual. The fire was still raging at 5 p.m., the end of Blondel's shift. Impossible to save anything, Rose wrote despondently that day to Georgia. So, Rose, I think, publicly writes this for the first time in her memoir, and immediately there is backlash. And that question and doubt over this account lasts to the present day. So I knew, in the style of this kind of book, narrative nonfiction, you are in it with the characters, so there's no voice that says ex-historian says this or this person claims that. So I knew once I got to this section, and I actually wrote this book predominantly chronologically, so I left it kind of, I'll deal with that in 1943, but I knew I would have to deal with it in some way. And so as I was doing all my research everywhere, I had in the back of my mind, maybe I'll find something that will prove it, but it has to be really a smoking gun, as they say, since it's been questioned for so long. At the same time, I also traced back, where does this doubt come from? With myths like this, they just get repeated and repeated, and no one really checks what the source is over time. And so I discovered that it was actually the Germans in the museum who worked there at the time who said to a German newspaper when her book was published, this event did not happen. But they added, but if it did, Rose did it. So the classic deflect, pass blame, but that stuck because it was in a legitimate German newspaper. And so research is a combination of being very meticulous and organized, but then there's a lot of serendipity to it. And the serendipity happens because you've been meticulous. And so I didn't live in France. So I would go for periods of time, go to an archive, or the family might say, we have all this new material we want to show you. And I would rapidly photograph what seemed relevant, take some notes, and then deal with it later. And so there's a few places that have most of Rose's papers. The French National Archives have everything dealing with her work for the museum. The French Diplomatic Archives has everything she left behind in her office. And she was a pack rat, so there's 1,000 boxes of stuff in that archive. And they've left the material roughly in the organization that she had it. There's different ways to think of archival work. Some people think you got to reorganize it so it's easy to figure out, and some people think it's better to respect the method of that person and how they left it behind. So that's what this material is like. And there's hundreds of boxes that just say Rose's personal documents and no inventory. Because what's important in France is actually about art restitution and less about what happened in World War II. And so the materials that are related to, do you need to restitute a painting that's been looted from you? That stuff has been itemized, but not her personal materials. So, but in fact, she mixed things all the time. And so I was trying to make sense of this archive. So I was taking notes. I was at a friend's 40th birthday. What I was doing their birthday in Ibiza was cataloging things. And it was early morning and nobody was up yet. And it was a box of unrelated things to this incident. And in the very back, suddenly I saw all these notarized, handwritten documents. And I said, this date is interesting. It seems to say, oh wait, these are the names of the guards that worked here during the war. I know these names. And then it seemed like they were referring to some of this stuff. So it was handwritten, so it's like some of it's hard to decipher. So when my husband woke up, who's French, I shoved the computer in front of his screen. Is this what I think it is? He's like, yes, I think so. And so 4 guards plus the head of all of security at the Louvre, who actually wrote an account the day after it happened. And then these guards in the 60s wrote their accounts because Rose wrote to each of them and said, if you remember this incident and you were here at the museum, please write down your accounts and get it notarized for me. And I don't know what she did with it. I assume she did show them to somebody, but like many things, they get lost to time, and there they were. So, and then later I found a small little newspaper article that published a few months after the event in the Resistance newspaper that talked about it with some detail as well. So I was really pleased to actually be able to find this material and include a very dramatic scene, of course, and help set some of the record straight about Rose's activities, and maybe I'll conclude with a little bit what happened to Rose after the war. There's a lot of exciting things that happened, including her trying to save a last train of art that the Germans want to move out. 1,000 paintings, 50 sculptures, and 47 more train cars of bric-a-brac that they just, gluttonously want to take out of the country. And she knows that likely the Allies are coming soon. D-Day's already happened. This is now early August. And she thinks there's a chance that they might save this train and prevent it from leaving the country. So this episode actually gets optioned from her memoir to become the Burt Lancaster film The Train. I don't know if you guys have seen it or heard of it, but it holds up quite well. It's really a Burt Lancaster caper, but a character based on Rose shows up in the first 5 minutes of the film that kicks off the action that's about to come. And of course, it's dramatized and a lot of things get blown up. But it's a great film, and they filmed it in the Jeu de Paume on set. And it's during this time that it's being filmed that Rose is invited back to the set. And for the first time, she re-enters, actually, not just the museum, but as it was set up roughly in the war. And there's German soldiers wearing knee-high boots, carrying rifles and wearing helmets. And it unsettles her in a way that had not happened yet. So for 2 decades, she had really subsumed everything that had happened. And she got so flustered, she left the interview and I guess went somewhere, went home. And the next day she comes back and says, I, who am always so put together, could not even find the metro. And so for the first time, she had to really confront what had happened to her. And she was really so good at, I said subsuming before, but suppressing all the different versions of herself, and especially in the wartime period, that for 2 decades she kind of didn't address any of that. And then, so she experienced some fame during this time, but for different reasons, she was almost completely forgotten by the time she died. She was a bit of an inconvenient witness to a lot of things that had happened, both, of course, the Germans, but some of the French who had collaborated, and a lot of the names that a lot of people in power kind of went back into power. And she was continuing to talk about art restitution in a time that the world had moved on, and we were in the Cold War and following. So, and then in other ways, she got suppressed. So at some point, her books were pulled off the bookshelves. She did her best to actually offer it to the libraries and museums in France. There are copies of every single letter she wrote, hundreds, to libraries offering up her copies. She was told by a French minister not to write the sequel to her own book. So those are some of the reasons why perhaps those notarized documents fell out of, kind of lost the light of day. And so it's in the late 90s, a Rose Valland Association was created in her hometown, run by very valiant, passionate locals, and they were extremely helpful in my book, and introducing me to people who I needed to speak to, and continue to push for the legacy of Rose in France and around the world. So I'd love to open it up to questions. There's a lot of other episodes in here, so.
Yeah.
I got several, but I will.
Yeah, please. The more the merrier.
Do 2 at a time.
Yeah.
First of all, what happened to Joyce?
Yeah.
Unless that's a spoiler.
Well, I'll talk about her incarcerations. I think that I do want to address. So, all the British men, women, children, elderly, babies were taken, put onto the same cattle cars that deported the Jewish population from France, but the British were interned in the east of France, in what were former prisoner of war camps for Germans, and turned over to become this British incarceration camp. And so hundreds of women died in this. There were predominantly women in the one she went to, and it was believed before I wrote the book that the family had said, we heard the resistance broke her out, But it was a little bit early in the war for the resistance to be doing such brazen things. And so it's one of the things that I looked into, and by tracking down her through the U.S. Embassy files, learned that it's the U.S. Embassy that applied to release her, worked with the German government to try to release her. Yeah.
So you had to go back and rewrite based on what you discovered about Joyce.
Yeah.
And I would assume it's the publisher's marketing material of the book.
Yeah.
It's been, if you will, positioned as a lesbian love story in part.
In part, yeah.
Yeah, and so, but you didn't start off with that. So did you? Did that affect your publishing contract?
No, because I was actually waiting for my edits. And so that's in that time period, I was like, well, I might as well look into this. So I'm someone that does not like anything to be left unanswered, even if it doesn't enter the book. Like, I just need to know for my own sake. And so I was like, let me spend this time, now that I have time, to dig into Joyce and who she is. And so that stuff just took a long time because I would wait for documents to be sent to me, or I might need to go somewhere. And it wasn't part of like the search, and it wouldn't appear in those other archives. And so, but then when my editor was ready to read it, I said, wait, I just got all these new letters, and I discovered Joyce. And so it did delay the editing process, but I did turn in my first version on time, and so that's the date that kind of matters.
But they repositioned the book. It sounds like.
Yeah, but I think not enough. I had wished they had, really made it part of the headline. It became one of like the talking points of the book, but it's one of the big discoveries. It's not that we didn't know that Joyce existed, but we didn't know anything about their history. And so, like, kind of looking back, like, it could have been great to just really proclaim that. I think the thought is, like, not a lot of people know who Rose Valland is here, so, like, maybe it's not that relevant. Like, maybe we should talk about that she's a female hero, and, like, that's enough. I don't really know the logic behind it, but I think I would have liked that to be
Because
even
it's
more.
been positioned more as an LGBTQ plus.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah.
At least in the marketing of
Okay.
it.
Yeah, I mean, and then with publicity, we worked with making sure that the LGBT publications and podcasts,
Yeah.
like trying to get coverage
But
in it.
they didn't come back to you and say, "Oh, we got to redo your deal because this is now a different genre."
No. Yeah. It remained kind of World War II narrative nonfiction, but it had this additional element, which then helped bring Rose to life, right? Because we also understand then, within a month of the Nazis taking over, Rose is arrested. So I think we can all imagine what that might feel like, to have someone you love disappear. And one of the things I looked into was, did Rose even go and ask her whereabouts with the U.S. Embassy? And so I combed through, initially to find Joyce, every single communication in and out of the U.S. Embassy during World War II, to find Joyce, which I did, which led to more discoveries, but not a single thing about a welfare check or anything. But later, her mother would send welfare checks. So those records are supposed to be there, if it happened. And the most telling thing was that by December 1940, it said simply, Joyce here and another woman are no longer employed by the embassy. We hired 2 new secretaries who speak German, and no other details. So they kind of just assumed that they disappeared, and this is wartime. Not disappeared in like necessarily a bad way, but maybe they went home, or maybe they're just living somewhere else. And yeah, but it was clear they didn't think she was coming back. And then when she did come back, there was a flurry of documentation about, like, do we pay her for that time? Like, what do we do now? So it was clear it was a surprise. But then, of course, when they did learn, then they tried to get her out.
So how did you come to this in the first place?
Yeah, so I spent, so we can talk about Untapped New York for a second.
Oh, cool.
So that's the company I founded in 2009, about New York's secrets, hidden places, really based on my background in architecture, urban design. And so in my spare time, I could not read anything about New York City. It'd be super triggering. Like, we need to write an article about that. We need to make a tour. It's so interesting. So it would be like, you know, not relaxing whatsoever. And so I decided to start reading lots of World War II books. My grandfather survived the atomic bomb in Hiroshima. He was a Taiwanese student in Japan at the time. And so that's sort of part of my family history. But I think growing up as an American, I wanted to be American. And so although that story was interesting, I never really looked into the Asian side of World War II. But I loved the European theater of World War II when we studied it. And so I decided to just read a lot of stuff. Then I married someone French, so I was like, might as well learn about French World War II history now. And so then I fell into a subgenre of female spy World War II nonfiction books. Lots of them exist. And I love them. I think I always thought to myself, what would I have done in the same exact scenario, in those person's shoes? But then I took a little detour because I read a New York Times review about a book called Göring's Man in Paris. This is about Göring's art dealer in Paris, who was an art historian, German, who was sent to work in the Jeu de Paume museum and was Rose's nemesis in this museum. She hated him and he hated her. To the end of their lives, they hated each other. And so every few chapters, this woman named Rose Valland would appear. And first I was amazed that I hadn't heard of her because I had read all the books about female spies, the compilation books about female spies. And then I was really struck by her story. I studied art history as well. There was certain similarities I was sensing. And then just had a hunch that her wartime story was very likely a lot more interesting than what I had seen. And that's the story with, I feel like, a lot of women and marginalized populations. Their stories don't get fully told or people don't look into them. And so that became sort of my quest. Yeah, that turned into this book. Yes.
Can I please ask two questions?
Yes.
The first one is, Rose was from humble background.
Yes.
But then she takes two positions, first secretary and then curator, unpaid for years and years and years.
Yeah.
So where did the money come from? Did she have another job, or was that Joyce's money?
Yes. So I would use the modern day term hustling. So she had many, many jobs during the 30s when she was unpaid. So she was working as an art teacher. She was working as a French teacher. She was giving tours of museums, not only her museum, but other museums. She was a freelance journalist. So she was writing for publications all around France, and she won awards from Le Figaro and other publications for her writing. She was also working as an art dealer middleman. So I think she was using her contacts that she had. She would meet people at all the art exhibitions, and I got hold of her address book, and it was just like a who's who of who's in art world in France at the time, and also in America. And so she actually facilitated the sale of at least 3 paintings we know about: a Juan Gris painting, a Leger painting, and Alfred Gleiz's. And I discovered this because I came across her name in the provenance of some paintings. One is at the Guggenheim, one is at the Cleveland Museum, and was like, what is this? And eventually, so I spoke to people at Christie's who had handled those sales. They're like, we believe she really did sell that work. And then I found a letter in which it's the months leading up to World War II, and she writes to her cousin that, well, she says, this Hitler is very tiring, but adds, this uncertainty is bad, especially, this uncertainty is bad, especially for me in the luxury trade. And when I first read that, I was like, I don't really understand what she's saying here, because, okay, museum, yes, but trade, like, and then when I saw that she had been in the provenance, I was like, this line now makes sense. She was probably maybe making pretty good money doing these deals, and was worried about the suppression of trade happening just before the war. Yeah. But I think Joyce's salary must have helped as well. Yeah.
Because she was well off, wasn't she?
Her family, seemed to be pretty well off, and then she was working. She was getting paid.
So the second question, how do we know what was burned or destroyed? You mentioned Dali and you mentioned Picasso in the Harlequin. I always thought that the Nazis, when they confiscated art, the things they didn't like, they tried to sell in Switzerland.
It's both. So they did, in Germany, they already had burned some from their museums. And then there's a chapter in here about the Lucerne auction, which is fascinating because Joseph Pulitzer Jr. is there on his honeymoon. He buys a bunch of stuff. Pierre Matisse is his dealer, his representative. Alfred Barr doesn't show up. It sends a secret emissary to bid on their behalf, and there's a letter that he writes later to one of his directors. I'm just as glad that our name is not associated with this. Make sure you write that these were purchased at the Buchholz Gallery in New York City. Things like that. So it's a very dramatic, cinematic auction. And that was like sort of the best of the German seizures were there. And then in France, a lot of them got stuck in this place. A lot of them got exchanged. So part of the new ideas that the Germans had come up with, particularly this man Bruno Lose, was, okay, why don't we exchange some of this problematic artwork if we can't sell it and we don't know what to do with it. So how about 10 Picasso paintings for one, or like sometimes it'd be like 20 different paintings for one Vermeer or one Holbein or something of the art that Hitler liked and the Nazis found acceptable. So a lot of stuff went that way, and then other stuff went into the open auction market in France, and then some like this burned. And then in terms of what was burned, so Rose, from what I found in her documents, there was a partial list that she made, but not complete by any means. And so that's one of the questions that people have raised. I think either some of the paintings may not have been actually burned in the end or something. But you know, documentation in wartime, and all these paintings often have the same name, like how many like Women at the Window by Matisse and Still Life and Harlequin and Guitar. So, and then one of the other questions that's come up that people have said about this event is, why isn't there a police report? Why isn't there a fire department report? And my answer to that is, who is calling the fire department saying, hey, in this Nazi stronghold, these things are burning? So I think from a journalistic perspective, with so many first-hand eyewitness accounts, it's enough. But there remains the question of like, what are those paintings in full? And I don't know if we'll ever fully know.
I wanted to say before I forget, before the questions end, once the live stream stops, just want to ask everybody here for this inaugural event this summer if we could gather around Michelle for a photograph at the end. So, thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm just curious if through you obviously were a scholar of World War II prior to this, but this particular research, has it changed at all your way of thinking about how like the modern day has been affected by this humongous event at all, and if so, how?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, I didn't realize the extent to which art and architecture were so closely tied to Nazi ideology. I mean, I think it's always been known that there's a connection, right? But I think what I learned looking through all the German decrees regarding art was that how concerted it was, how far in advance they had planned this. And like I said earlier, invasion and looting happened at the same time. And I think that's sort of a new, at least I didn't know that. And that really the path is invasion, looting, and then it kind of ties straight to final solution. You know, and each action seemed little at the time. For example, they would first say, oh, you don't need to report if you have artwork over 100,000 francs. So people would dutifully go and report. And then same thing, you just need to check in once a week with the Kommandantur and write your address and where you are. Of course, we know how those documents were used later. And so things unfolded seemingly slowly, but to a very catastrophic point. And I would say while writing this book, it was just very eerie echoes from past to present. The language of totalitarianism, to me, just remains constant. So that's not just the United States, but everywhere around the world. Like I would read the news and be like, I just literally read something from World War II that's saying something in the same way. And I think one of the things that struck me was how euphemistic all these orders were. So they would never say, steal the art, take the art. It would all say safeguard, protect, right? So everything was the verbiage, and I think sometimes we can see similar things as well. So I think the important thing is to know the past and know the language and what it might mean. Doesn't mean it necessarily will play out that way, but to be aware of what happened before. But yeah, I learned a lot, especially about German decrees. They were coming all the time, and they would contradict each other, and everyone would fight.
Executive orders? Oh no.
Are there any online questions?
No.
Okay.
Listen.
Yeah.
Well, wonderful. Thank you,
you so
Michelle.
much.
Thank you.